This is the Assassin stream. This is going to be the Assassin videos. They'll be up on YouTube very shortly after the stream, hopefully. And this is not only how to play Assassins, but also how to play against them. This video is going to focus not only on the beginner aspect of things, how to get introduced into Assassins, but it should also be really useful for the more advanced players. I'm going to be covering things specifically that I didn't know, or things that I think a lot of the League community doesn't know about these champions. We'll be going over every single champion in detail, going over their abilities, all that stuff. We've got information on how they do in pro play, how they do in solo queue. We'll be talking a little bit about their lore for each one of the champions. We'll be talking about their power spikes, what's their common runes and build paths, all of that stuff. We won't go into a lot of like really in-depth like combos or things like that. There are plenty of great players out there who have very detailed combo guides, and I definitely want to point you towards those people because they are far better at those champions than I am. I'm going to focus on things more from an analytical perspective and from a numbers perspective, and also from a details perspective, so you guys can learn the details about these champions that a lot of people don't know. Let's move on to the mobility assassins. So mobility assassins, we got Kassadin, Katarina, Kiana, and Talon. First up we're going to talk about is Kassadin. So Kassadin was released in 2009. He was reworked in 2014. He holds the record for the highest ban rate ever. This is back, I believe, Season 4. Exile did a really great video on the history of Kassadin and why he was so overpowered way back then. It's a great kind of League documentary almost. So definitely check out that video if you have not seen it already. It's very good. He used to have a silence on his Q, and he used to have Mana Steal on his W. He was the only champion in the game. Actually, I think Soraka had a Mana Steal or something like that. Or no, she had a Mana Restore on her E. But Kassadin had a Mana Steal on his W where he'd steal mana from the enemy. And he also had a silence as well, which made him really strong. He also used to have 200 more range on his ultimate. So his ultimate range was even longer, which made him really, really difficult to pin down. Nowadays, he's primarily used as a counterpick in professional play. He's kind of the anti-mage. He was actually, I think, we don't want to say that they stole the idea from Dota, but they kind of stole the idea from Dota. He's modeled off of anti-mage from Dota, and he kind of fulfills that role that he's very good into AP matchups. So as far as his lore is concerned, he was a Shuriman guide for caravans. So he was somebody who could kind of guide the caravans through the desert and make sure they would stay away from a lot of the dangers that the desert had, which meant that he was away from home a lot. He was a father and a husband. So yeah, that was kind of his life, as he had a daughter and he was a husband. And then one time when he came back from the caravan, his village was destroyed by the void, and he couldn't find his wife or his daughter anywhere. And he swore vengeance. He just went, completely crazy, as you would expect someone would when they lose the only thing that's important to them in their life. So what he did was he stole this ancient weapon called the Nether Blade of Horok, and he also combined this with technology from Zon, and he got that technology blessed by Ionian mystics. He basically called in every favor he had to create this kind of battle armor that he could use to get into the void. So he actually went to Acathia and went into the void to basically kill the void creatures. While it's not explicitly talked about in his lore, it's kind of hinted that Kai'Sa is actually his daughter. I don't know if that's been confirmed in the lore, but it's definitely strongly hinted in the lore that Kai'Sa is his lost daughter. So in general, Kassadin, he has a really, really weak early game. Early game is where he gets punished a lot. He has a lot of counter matchups, which is why he's typically only used as a counter pick. He's really good into AP champions, but he struggles against AD champions. So if you pick Kassadin too early in the draft, people will normally counterpick you with an AD champion. He typically doesn't have that much mana issues in the in the early game or the late game, but he has a lot of mana issues in the mid game. He is insanely strong late game. Once he hits level 16, he is terrifying. He is so good once he hits level 16. As long as you are decently ahead and you hit level 16, you have a really good chance at winning the game once Kassadin hits that level. He can melt towers late game, so he can be a really good split pusher. He can solo most champions in the game once he has some levels on him. Having a level and a gold lead is very important on him. And you also really want to kind of just play safe early game because he's really good at scaling. He typically goes for more scaling-oriented items like Rod of Ages, Seraphs, things like that. So yeah, you definitely want to play very safe with him early, and then once you hit kind of that mid-game, late-game power spike, that's when you can go kind of crazy with him and 1v5 the game. So Kassadin's passive is Voidstone. He is permanently ghosted. So you see this as a common thread. A lot of assassins have ways that they can ghost, which means that they ignore unit collision, which allows them to not get minion blocked very easily. Additionally, he takes 15% reduced magic damage. So he gains a huge bonus against magic damage dealers, pretty much anybody who scales the AP, which is why he's such a great counter pick into mages mainly. Kassadin's Q is Null Sphere. So it's point and click magic damage. Has a pretty decent range on it. So 650 range, so that's longer than most ranged auto attacks. It'll interrupt the channel of it'll interrupt channeled abilities, so you can use it to like stop a Malzahar ultimate and things like that. It used to be a silent, but that was changed to the channel interrupt instead, because a silence is just way too powerful. Additionally, it'll grant him a magic shield when he casts it. So the shield will appear instantaneously, even though the projectile has a travel time. So basically, anytime you see that the enemy is going to use an ability on you, you use your Q in response, you'll immediately gain the magic shield and you'll negate some of their damage, and they'll still take damage from you. So that's how he uses his Q to basically negate the poke from the enemy champion and deal some poke himself. He can also use it to safely farm. If he's getting zoned off CS, it is a form of ranged damage that he can use to CS from range. Kassadin's W is Netherblade. It passively increases Kassadin's base attack damage. This is what allows him to take towers really fast. So it increases his basic attacks by 20 plus 10% of his AP. And also, if you don't know, the way that you can deal damage to towers is it either takes your AD or it takes a percentage of your AP, whichever would deal more damage to the tower. So because Kassadin stacks AP, he winds up taking towers really, really fast with this passive. He's kind of similar to Diana in that effect that if you leave him alone in a side lane, he will shred through towers very, very quickly with his auto attacks. Kassadin's W is also an auto attack reset, so you can auto W, and that's a quick way. If you decide to go for Electrocute, you can basically Q auto W for a very, very fast combo, or you can auto WQ for a really fast combo as well. When you activate it, you gain 50 range, you deal increased damage, and you restore missing mana. And if you use it on a champion, it's quintupled. So this is why Kassadin doesn't have mana issues in the early game. If you use his W, especially on champions when you're trading, you'll regain a massive amount of your mana, which will allow you to stay in lane a lot longer. It allows him to spam his Q and his E pretty much whenever they're off cooldown. But yeah, you really want to be using that W to try and maximize your mana regen while you're in lane. And one of the cool things about Netherblade is it costs 1 mana. So as long as you have 1 mana, you have enough mana for Netherblade. So Kassadin's E is Force Pulse. So the way this ability is actually really unique. I don't know of many other abilities that have this, but in order for him to be able to cast this ability, he needs to have 6 abilities be used near him, and he gains a stack for each ability used. So if his lane opponent uses 2 abilities, then he gains 2 stacks, and then if he uses an ability, then he gains a 3rd stack, and if the jungler comes in and uses 3 abilities, then that would be 6 stacks, and he could use the E. So it doesn't have to be him that has to use the abilities. It can be anyone within range of him uses abilities, and he'll gain a stack in order to be able to use Force Pulse. So the reason why is it is a pretty powerful ability. It's a AoE magic damage and a slow in this cone. It's a 600 range and has a 80-degree radius, so it's almost like a quarter of a circle. It has really high AP scaling. The slow is 50 to 90%. So it's a 90% slow at max rank, which makes it near impossible to escape from Kassadin, especially once he has his ultimate online. So Kassadin's R is Rift Walk. It is a 500 range dash. So remember, we said that he lost 200 range on a long time ago. So it used to be a 700 range. Now it's down to 500 range, and that feels much more balanced with it being at 500 range. At level 16, it is a 2-second cooldown. 2 seconds. So every 2 seconds, he can go a 500 range dash. So this is why Kassadin is so strong in the late game. So at rank 1, it's a 5-second cooldown. Rank 2, 3.5. And then once he hits rank 3, which is at level 16, it is a 2-second cooldown. That means that if he's got 40% cooldown, then it drops to like a little bit over 1 second. He can use it every like 1.2 seconds or something like that. It deals AoE magic damage on arrival. So it's a decent amount of magic damage. It's 80 to 120 magic damage base with a 40% AP scaling ratio. And it also scales off of maximum mana. So it also deals 2% of his maximum mana as additional damage on the Rift Walk. So this is why getting mana items is really good on Kassadin, because getting mana on him not only allows him to use his abilities more often, but it also increases his ultimate's damage. Additionally, you can use the Rift Walk multiple times within 15 seconds. It will double the mana cost each time, but it will also increase the damage. So it increases the damage linearly. So the damage increases by 40 to 60, plus 10% of his AP, plus 1% of his maximum mana with each stack. So the damage increases linearly, but the mana cost is exponential. So the mana cost is initially 50, then it goes to 100, then 200, then 400, then 800, and it will just keep going exponentially until Kassadin can't cast it anymore. So if you stack it up way too much and you can't cast it anymore, you just have to wait the 15 seconds until it resets, and then the damage and the mana cost will go back down to the base value again. So this makes it really interesting with Kassadin. If he has like a 3 or a 4 stack ultimate, he deals a ton of damage with that. He hits like a freaking truck. Once he has his ultimate stacked up, obviously it burns through his mana very quickly once you have 3 or 4 stacks, but this is why he builds a lot of mana items, which we'll go over in a little bit. So as far as the skill order, R, you always want to max R whenever you can. He typically will max E first because it deals a lot of damage, and it's up surprisingly a high amount, especially if you're up against a mage or something like that. Q max second, and W max third. You can go Fleet Footwork in matchups that you are worried about. So Fleet Footwork is usually the most common, and it's used to help him get through that early laning phase. It gives him the extra movement speed, gives him some extra sustain. All around, it's a general good rune for him, especially if you're not too confident in the matchup. I haven't seen a lot more of Kassadin's going Conqueror. So Conqueror would give him a little bit more power in longer fights. And then there are some people who will go for Electrocute, and I have even seen some Unsealed Spellbook being used on Kassadin. But in general, I would say Fleet Footwork is probably the way you want to go, or Conqueror. Those seem to be the two most common, and it depends on whether or not you think you need help in laning phase or whether you think you can survive the laning phase. Pretty much always will take Flash on Kassadin, and that's mainly for the early game, because he doesn't have any dash until he hits level 6. You need that Flash for that early game to avoid those ganks and being put behind. For his second summoner, typically he'll take Teleport. Sometimes he'll take you Ignite if he really thinks he can stomp the laning phase. But I'd say most of the time you would take Teleport as your secondary summoner spell. The core items for Kassadin are Rod of Ages and Archangel's Staff. Those are the two core items on Kassadin. He wants to stack mana. He wants those scaling items. He really loves the additional beefiness he gains from Rod of Ages, the additional shield he gains from Seraphs once it transforms. Those are kind of his core items. So he's kind of like Rise, where he wants to build into mana, and he's all about the scaling game. He wants to scale into the late game. Typically, you will see Kassadin's go for Lichbane and ZHONYA'S. So Lichbane is really good on him because, again, the Lichbane has some of its cost is towards mana, and a lot of champions can't make use of that. They can't turn that into actual combat power. It's non-combat stats, but with Kassadin, it's actually combat stats because of his ultimate. So he actually, Lich Bane is extremely gold efficient on him. ZHONYA'S is usually really good because he can basically jump in, blow somebody up. If the enemy team tries to CC him, he can ZHONYA'S, and then he can basically jump back out with his Rift Walk once he comes out of ZHONYA'S. Typically, you see Kassadins go either defensive boots or sorcerer shoes. It depends on whether they feel like they need the defense. I think he would prefer to go sorcerer shoes, but sometimes you need to go those defensive boots options. Either Ninja Tabbies if they're really AD heavy, or Merc Treads if they have a lot of crowd control. I have seen a few Kassadins go boots of the Ionian boots of mobility, the ones that give the CDR, but that's really a lot more situational. So I would stay away from those unless you really know what you're doing. There's also an off-meta style with Kassadin, which is building tank items. So you build tank items with mana, like Abyssal Mask, Frozen Heart, things like that. I think I've even seen people go Iceborne Gauntlet, that type of stuff. And basically, it works really well because he already has a lot of damage, and you just make him really tanky. It's kind of similar to the Tank Fizz top lane back from Season 6, but instead it's Kassadin, and he basically turns into a late-game monster that you can't kill. So it's kind of a cool play style if you want to try it out. I think there's quite a few videos on it online that can kind of go over the details. But yeah, it's a pretty cool off-meta build if you like playing Kassadin. Yeah, but basically, if you're looking for a scaling assassin, Kassadin. That's who you want to go to. He's a monster when it comes to scaling. So most assassins are typically better in the early mid game. He's the best in the late game. Alright guys, that is the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. If you feel like I missed anything essential on Kassadin, please let me know with a comment below. All I ask is you be respectful. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. This is Randomonium signing off.